Right now, let's please welcome back to the stage Brian Goldstein of Energy Independence Now and his topic of what does it really take to be energy independent. Brian?
Hi there. All right, so we've talked a lot about climate change and about air quality issues, which are two very separate topics that I'll dive into a little more in a couple of minutes. But there is a very real threat besides those that's facing this room, and I think it's called death by PowerPoint. So instead of sending you guys through my PowerPoint, because you've seen all this information over the last day and a half, I figured I would just stand up here and talk to you a little bit about what Energy Independence Now, the nonprofit that I run, does, where we focus the evolution of the organization. As you already know, my primary focus is hydrogen, so I thought, in the 15 minutes we have, I'll give you a little background, but then we can do some Q&A so that we can address some questions of the audience and have a little audience interaction. Because I know hydrogen is kind of a opaque topic. It's relatively new to most of us in this room, and I thought, maybe this is a good opportunity to interact with the crowd and kind of, take the temperature and figure out where we are on the topic of hydrogen. So Energy Independence Now is the only environmental nonprofit that I know of in the world that just focuses on hydrogen. We were organized and developed about 20 years ago to create the California Hydrogen Highway Initiative in California. We accomplished that 15 years ago. It was adopted by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. We then went on to co-write with Union of Concerned Scientists legislation that requires that 33.3% of all hydrogen sold in the state of California for transport would be renewable. So the interesting thing about that was, as I said, in 2006, that was 9 years before a consumer could walk into a dealership and drive a fuel cell electric vehicle off the lot. So we, from the very beginning, have focused on the very important role of renewable hydrogen. So we'll hear a lot of things about blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, decarbonized hydrogen. Just for simplicity's sake, we're going with renewable hydrogen right now. There is a role for decarbonized hydrogen, but I think carbon capture and sequestration is a polarizing topic, one that I'm certainly happy to get into if you guys want to ask some questions about it. But my primary job is to work between industry and the policy community. The policy community looks to the environmental community to validate the efforts that they're considering, right? They look for new ideas and they look for validation for their current ideas from the environmental community. So it's the job of the environmental community to make sure that, in this case, the hydrogen that we're promoting is the cleanest possible fuel type or energy carrier. And the issue there is that the other enviros don't like me. They don't like EIN, they don't like hydrogen. They say that it's a Trojan horse for natural gas and sometimes coal. And sometimes that's the case. In fact, the vast majority, well over 90% of hydrogen produced in the United States right now comes from steam methane reform of natural gas. Is it cleaner than gasoline? Yeah. Is it cleaner than just using natural gas? Yeah, absolutely. Is it as clean as we want it to be? Is it zero emissions? Absolutely not. So we have the ability and this really fascinating challenge to create an elegant solution to the zero emission transport and the other areas of hydrogen that I'll go through in just a second. We have the ability to not just do it and kind of half-ass do it where we're using fossil hydrogen. We have the ability to create this very elegant system that is completely clean, completely efficient. And the way I look at it, take it as a challenge, take it as an obligation for the environmental community. And in my mind and the manner that I operate EIN, this is our goal, this is our focus. We won't rest until we hit 100% renewable, and frankly, we probably won't rest after. So, with our transportation routes, we founded the California Hydrogen Highway Initiative. That was an effort between the business community, specifically the automotive OEMs, and the policy community in California. So that consists of the governor's office, the legislature, the California Energy Commission, and the California Air Resource Board. What we managed to do was to get legislation assuring that the state would put $200 million into the hydrogen highway and commit to building the first 100 hydrogen fueling stations. We need about 1,000, but we settled for 100 15 years ago, just to make sure we could get the ball rolling. Now what we're doing right now is conducting financial analysis, trying to figure out at what point we can stop asking the state for money, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I have to take a pragmatic approach to this, and I have to make sure that we're appeasing industry, that we're giving industry the ability to make money. We're not asking them just to do this for the good of the planet at the expense of their shareholders. It's just never going to work that way. So what we have to do, and we have to do this because every time I go to Sacramento and I ask them for more money, the first question they ask me is, Brian, when are you going to stop asking me for money? So we're now modeling that out to figure out exactly when the hydrogen fueling network is going to be self-sufficient. And that's going to rely on a couple of things. One is economies of scale to reduce the cost of stations, where we've made some great advances in that, but it's just going to take production of the equipment, the storage equipment, the compressors, the dispensers, the distribution system is a huge challenge right now. It's just going to take us doing this over and over and over again to find efficiencies, and we're seeing some amazing efficiencies right now. So when we first started building hydrogen stations, and I should clarify, EIN doesn't build hydrogen stations. We work in between the state and the developers that do. Those stations took an average of 5 years from the time that they were approved to actually opening up and fueling a vehicle for a consumer. And there were a lot of reasons for that, but the primary reason for that was that we had to get zoning approval from various city councils. We had to get fire chiefs to sign off who had no idea what the dangers or risks of hydrogen were. So you take a place like Los Angeles, and the hydrogen highway right now is statewide in California. We've built a network on the East Coast that's not quite open yet, and we can talk about that in a few minutes as well. But LA County has, and I may have this number off just by a couple, 223 individual municipalities. So that's 223 individual mayors, zoning boards, city councils, and fire chiefs. So every time we want to go 5 miles down the road and build a new hydrogen station, we have to start the process all over, educating them. What would it take to put out a safety event or to address a safety event at a station? What would the impact be on the neighbors? What's the impact on traffic? So in the beginning, it took us 5 years. We've gotten that down to 18 months at this point, and we should have it down to about a year pretty soon. Additionally, there are several developers that are producing kind of plug-and-play stations right now that you could just bring in, essentially and set up in a couple of weeks. But again, the zoning approval takes some months, the planning and permitting going into it. So our goal right now is to hit 1,000 stations by 2030. We think that somewhere between 200 and 300 stations, the system will be self-sufficient, but that also relies on the automakers bringing the cars to California. So right now, California has the most fuel cell electric vehicles in the world. We have 7,000 vehicles on the road. We are about where the battery electric vehicle industry was 10 years ago. And it has nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with building the stations and the infrastructure to support the technology. The technology is sound. The technology has kept people alive in spacecraft. It has kept people alive in submarines for decades, 50, 60, 70 years. We have used electrolysis to separate hydrogen and oxygen from water molecules to provide oxygen for people to breathe in space and underwater. There are really no technological hurdles to what we're doing right now. The vehicles that I drive every day are 3rd and 4th generation vehicles. Our organization has 7 fuel cell electric vehicles, a mixture between Honda Clarities and Toyota Mirais. If there's one other OEM bringing fuel cell electric vehicles into the States right now, it's Hyundai. They're a little new to the game here, and they haven't allocated a lot to the North American market yet. They're waiting for more stations. But of those vehicles, I've never had to have one serviced over 4 years. The technology is absolutely sound. I drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco or Sacramento every couple of weeks. I've done it dozens of times. I stop one time halfway in between the two cities, and I fuel for 5 minutes. And the really cool thing about that is while I'm fueling in a town called Coalinga, has anyone here been to Coalinga, California before? A couple hands, right? It smells like cow shit. and it's 110 degrees there. It is not a place where you want to hang out for an hour to charge a car. And there are 18 Tesla fast charging stations lined up right next to the hydrogen refueling station. So while I drive in and I'm fueling up for 5 minutes, I look at all the people taking naps in their Teslas. I look at all the people that are behind the people taking naps in Teslas, waiting for their opportunity to then pull up and take a nap in a Tesla, so that they can fuel up in their 30 minutes to an hour or whatever they advertise, and then be on their way. So infrastructure has been an issue for hydrogen. It is certainly an issue for battery electric vehicles. The ICCT released a report a couple of months, I guess February, saying that California would be 64%, I believe, short of battery electric vehicle charging stations in the next 5 years. That was based on a goal of California adopting 1.5 million battery electric vehicles. Our new goal is 5 million vehicles. So we are going to be dramatically short on charging infrastructure. On top of that, about 50% of the people in California live in multifamily housing. They don't necessarily have access to charging. They don't necessarily even have garages. Most of them are street parking. Most of them don't necessarily have the ability to go out and buy a new vehicle, much less a $100,000 Tesla. So my point in telling you all of this is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are two tools in the zero emission vehicle toolbox, right? There are battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. So for us to want to choose a winner and suggest this is only going to be BEVs moving forward is short-sighted, and it would seriously limit our options and vehicle types moving forward. So there is no competition between the two technologies. We absolutely need both of those technologies. And to break that down briefly, by 2030 we would probably be looking at maybe an 80% BEV mix and a 20% fuel cell electric vehicle mix. So the benefits of the fuel cell electric vehicles is that they refuel very quickly. They have, even the fuel cell electric vehicle on the market right now with the lowest range is the Toyota Mirai. It has 312 miles, which is longer or further, about as far as the most expensive battery electric vehicle on the market. That car is 4 years old. There's a new one on the way. The Honda Clarity came out 6 months later. It has like a 360-mile range. The new Hyundai Nexo has almost a 400-mile range. So the ranges are only getting higher. The vehicle types can be much bigger because the batteries that go into battery electric vehicles are very heavy. So that's why we only see basically sedans and compact cars right now in battery electric vehicles. So I know there's a company, Rivian, that's advertising a pickup truck. They are suggesting they'll have 180 kilowatt hours of batteries on board that pickup truck. So to give you an idea of what it would take to give a pickup truck a 300 to 400 mile range and the towing capacity that Americans want in a pickup truck, the battery cost alone for that vehicle will be about $40,000. So that doesn't take into account any of the other components of the vehicle, R&D, CapEx, OpEx, nothing. So as we move into bigger vehicle types, which is what Americans want, Americans are buying 50% new vehicles, or 50% pickup trucks and SUVs right now. And there are very few, if not any of them, on the market that are in battery electric vehicles. So this is a critical space that fuel cell electric vehicles will fill. It's a space that we will be able to move forward into medium duty and heavy duty. I gave the example of the Port of Long Beach, the Twin Ports of Long Beach and San Pedro, where there are 17,000 heavy duty trucks. We simply cannot convert 17,000 trucks to run on batteries. It's just not going to work. We have to have hydrogen as part of the portfolio. I see that our time is drastically running out because I'm a talker, but we have about 1 minute left. Do we have any big questions that I can help answer in the next minute? Bruce.
I live in Dallas. Toyota moved to Plano, Dallas, and we talked to the senior executives of Toyota. And they're so discouraged because California promised them, I forget how many stations 3 years ago.
Sure.
And I think they built 3 or 4. And knowing California, I've lived in California, worked politically in California, how everything isn't a sales pace. It's a grandfather sales pace. how can you ever, I mean, it's clear that I think the technology needs electric, but how, you know, if you build it, they will come, but getting even 1,000 stations by 2030, it's a drop in the bucket for what's needed. So how possibly can you move legislatures forward? We're talking to the Texas legislature about jumping in on this, because Toyota's now in Texas.
Absolutely.
I think Toyota's kind of given up on California. They've had some, that's hyperbole, but they're so discouraged about what was promised and what was delivered.
I appreciate the question. It is being delivered right now. We just opened up our 40th hydrogen station in California. We'll have 100 stations by 2022, 2023. We had an executive order last year calling for the second round of 100 stations. We'll hit 200 stations over the next 5, 6, 7 years. At that point, the market should be able to take over, where we have to, you know, we can stop asking the government to pay for the stations. So there's a little bit of an ebb and flow. You need more stations, and then the OEMs bring more cars, and then you need more stations and more cars. The fact of the matter is hydrogen is having its moment right now. It has more attention than any other competing technology in this space. And developers are coming from all over the world to California. They're not relying on government grants to do it. There are companies that have, you know, confidentially told me that they will be building 50 to 100 new stations without government grants in California. We have a network on the East Coast right now that would allow you to drive from, I think it's Connecticut, all the way down to DC. The network's open. We're not selling the cars there yet. It's coming to other states. As I mentioned earlier, Texas is one of the most attractive states for us. It is the grail of the hydrogen industry here. And frankly, we need to be supplying the vehicles that consumers in Texas and in Colorado want, which is pickup trucks and SUVs, so you can fill the family in your car, and in Denver, put some skis on top, the dog in the back, and drive over the Continental Divide at 11,000 feet with, you know, 0 to 10 degree weather, and actually be able to get there and back without having to stop and charge a vehicle. And if any of you ever go skiing and take your cell phone up there, you'll see that the cold weather will zap the cell phone in no time. So battery electric vehicles aren't necessarily a good fit there, but there, you know, is an amount of commitment both from the policy community and from the automotive community that has to.
What does the basic hydrogen fueling station cost right now? How much is California subsidized? 100%?
Sorry, I see that I'm about to be pulled off stage with a proverbial cane, but I'm more than happy to follow up with you. With any of you, I'll be here over the next couple of days. Please grab me. My job is to talk about this. I'm known as just the hydrogen guy, so you don't even have to call me by name. If you see me around, please ask me these questions. I'd love to talk about it, and we'll talk to you about it until nice people like these tell me to stop, which is right now. So I appreciate your time and attention today.